All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk and John with you guys. Later in the first hour, Bernie Sanders unveils his plan on how to dismantle the big banks. Okay, now that's significant, man. I mean, he has a pretty decent chance of winning the presidency. If he does, it would be a sea change.
I looked at JR. I knew he'd shake his head no, and he indeed shook his head no.
Okay. You know that the guy is winning in New Hampshire. That automatically qualifies you as a contender. Mm-hmm. That he is by far and away the second leading contender in one of the major parties and would blow away any Republican in the field according to polling. But you go ahead and keep shaking your head, okay? Yeah.
You said Republican. I'm talking about Hillary Clinton.
No, I hear you. I'm saying he's the clear number two to Hillary Clinton, overwhelming number two. Anyone who's number two has a chance, and his numbers are not like, hey, they're at 7%. I'm not going to get into this shit, okay? Bernie's coming, feel the burn, okay? Him and frickin' Mankiewicz lock you guys away for the primaries. Anyway, and then in the second hour, lots of great stories with Anna, but one in particular, I don't know why they have banned light spanking in the UK, but they have, and I'm pretty pissed about it. Yeah. So we'll tell you about that later in the program. Okay. But we got a lot to get to in the first hour, so let's do it, John.
Let's jump right into it.
Yep.
President Obama is set to enact a number of new gun control regulations by executive order in the near future. And today we got a preview of what those regulations might look like in a speech that he gave. It was actually a press conference, and we're going to show you a bit of that very soon, including a part where he gets a bit emotional about some of the mass shootings we've had in this country over the past couple of years. But first, we want to give you some details of what might be included or supposed to be included in these gun control regulations. The federal government will issue guidance that will narrow who can sell guns without a federal license based on an evaluation of the circumstances surrounding individual gun sales. The idea is to reduce the number of for-profit dealers as opposed to collectors or people who only give or sell guns to family members or friends who avoid background checks. In addition, the FBI will hire more than 230 more people to help run background checks, an increase of more than 50% to the current staff. Lynch said that this was in part needed to keep up with rising demand. I love that they had less than a couple hundred people. We sell so many guns in this country. A couple hundred people take care of all of it. No one will slip by that system. It's foolproof. In addition, the government will also require background checks for people who try to buy restricted firearms through a legal entity, such as a corporation or trust, which is currently, you don't have to have those background checks if you do it that way. But no one would abuse that either. The Department of Health and Human Services will finalize a rule regarding health record privacy laws to remove barriers to states providing mental health records to the background check system. Now, considering how often we've heard about, it's a mental health issue, it's mental health, don't worry about the guns, it's mental health, I can't imagine any Republican being against this. And in addition, finally, I guess the administration will enforce tighter rules for reporting guns that are lost or stolen on their way to the buyer to make it easier for law enforcement to track down missing firearms. And again, who could possibly be against that?
Except the NRA and all the gun manufacturers. Now, they've always been against all of these regulations for good reason, because they want to sell more guns. So if you have loopholes that allow people to sell guns on the internet without doing background checks, well, you'll sell more guns, yeah. Right? If you don't check, for example, there's this technology where the gun knows your fingerprints and then will work only with you, and it
scans it in real time.
Right, and you can program it. My understanding is for your wife or whoever else you want it for. But if an intruder comes in and grabs your gun, he can't use it against you. Who would be against that, as John keeps saying? Well, the NRA would, because you know what? They want bad guys to have a gun.
Yeah.
Because the more bad guys that have a gun, A, they've sold those weapons, okay? B, it's going to scare the crap out of the good guys, theoretically, with guns. They're going to buy more guns. For them, it's a virtuous cycle. For us, it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So they don't want any of these checks because they want to make more money. And yes, by God, they definitely want the bad guys to have more weapons because they make more money.
Yeah. And the NRA cares so much more about whether people think guns are safe or not than they do about whether guns are safe or not. And that's why I think they're also fighting against things like the automatic readers and things like that, or even ones that just detect that you're wearing a bracelet that's coded to it, which I don't think anyone could possibly be against. They don't want those sorts of technologies being worked on or deployed, and they even boycott stores that sell guns that have those because they don't want to put out there the idea that guns are unsafe, that they need to be regulated in some way. And they don't care if not having those technologies means that, as we saw right after Christmas and on New Year's, a bunch of people kill their family members by accident because they think they're robbers, or a kid picks up a gun, shoots the dad in the face. Who cares about that? They've got guns to sell. This is big business, baby.
One more thing about that in regards to the lost or stolen guns. Again, why? I mean, if your gun is lost or it's stolen, it makes sense to report it so this a bad guy doesn't use it, right? And if they do, that it doesn't get connected to you because you reported it as stolen, right? It wasn't me that used that gun. That makes sense, right? Again, the NRA is against that. Why? Because that is a loophole that we keep calling them generic bad guys, right? But let's get real. Drug gangs, mobsters, they buy guns en masse. And part of the way that they buy the guns is lost weapons, right? Internet sales.
Whoops.
Right. All those different things. And if you keep tracking those, well, it's harder for those guys who buy a lot of guns to keep buying those guns.
Yeah.
And the NRA doesn't want it to be hard on gangs to buy guns. They want all the gangs to have as many guns as possible, again, because of that cycle that we just talked about.
Yeah. And look, I want to get to the Obama stuff in just a second, but the difficulty that we've had in this country to even pass expanded background checks, it might boggle my mind more than anything else in the universe. The idea that they say it's mental health, we just need to stop people maybe with mental health issues from getting guns. Well, if a person is crazy and wants to shoot up a school or a mall or a theater or whatever, and he can go to a store and have a background check to buy a gun, or he can buy it from a private party or online and not have the background check, what do you think he's going to do? And so then all of your rhetoric about mental health is absolute bullshit because all he's going to do is buy it through one of the easily accessible ways of not having a background check run. What possible reason could you want there not to be background checks there? It doesn't stop your ability to sell guns as a private party. It just delays it by a couple of days. And if it's that desperate that you need to buy or sell a gun, maybe you shouldn't buy or sell that gun, I think.
Well, that goes to what I actually think is the most important part of all these regulations, which is adding extra people to do the background checks. Because there was a very famous incident, the Charleston shooting, 9 people killed in the church by Dylan Roof, where it turns out if they had more people, they could have checked it in 3 days. They didn't have enough people. They couldn't finish the check in 3 days. And because of an insane law we have in America, that if you don't have time to finish the federal background check in 3 days, they give you the weapon anyway.
That's absolute insanity.
Yeah, and so Roof, he had a criminal background, would not have gotten the weapon under normal circumstances. But the NRA is desperate to have criminals have guns. So, hey, you couldn't make it in time. Great, sell to the criminals anyway. And all the mental health crying, John's right. Here are regulations saying, okay, well, if they have mental health problems, let's put that have the states help us put that into the background checks. Nope, we're against it. So stop lying.
Yeah.
So you're not in favor of doing anything about mental health. You're not in favor of bad guys not having guns. In fact, that's exactly why Wayne LaPierre said that very famous comment now. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Not a bad guy not having the gun.
Yeah.
That's
how
not an
about
accident
he
in
not have the
phrasing.
gun? Huh?
Yeah, no.
Yeah. So cut to next year, we start to heavily screen Syrian refugees, and that takes time. But if it takes more than 3 days, just let him in.
You know how long...
You would never do that. Why would you do that with a gun? Man, this guy, he's been to a lot of institutions, and there's crimes to look into, but I'm swamped. I just give it to him. He'll be fine.
That's great context. I'm really glad John brought that up because it takes, in our current system, about 18 to 24 months, a year and a half to 2 years for refugees to make it into this country. Okay, we're going to check them for 2 years. But if you want a gun, 3 days, then you get it if we didn't have enough time. Plus, if you're on a terrorist watch list, you can get a gun. Sometimes mistakes are made. Wait a minute, you're telling me we're going to check for 2 years to make sure this family running away from ISIS can get into the country, right? Mm-hmm. 2 years. But why? Because we're worried about terrorism. But as soon as they make it into the country, if they're even on a terrorist watch list, they can buy a gun right away.
Yeah.
That's insane. When are you going to get it through your heads? The NRA wants the terrorists to have guns. They want the criminals to have guns. And please, even if you're a right-winger, are you really going to look at us in the face, if that's possible through a video, and tell us, no, the gun manufacturers, they don't want to make extra money. They're not interested in the extra profit. No, they're super good moral people. And if they could, they would prevent any of their guns going to any bad guys because they do not want to make that extra money. They don't want those extra millions of dollars. Who do you think buys guns en masse? Yes, some of your yokel friends, okay, and then they go take over federal buildings. They're criminals of a different sort. But also mainly criminals.
Yeah, and people love to say, well, why you guys are so suspicious of government, and you haven't liked the government, the terrorism watch list in the past, so why are you so quick to trust the government just because they put someone on a list? I don't trust the government. I don't trust all the people that are on that list. But if by accident they put someone on there, I'm a little bit more okay with them not being able to buy a gun than perhaps not get on a plane, because you don't need to buy a gun. Anybody who accidentally gets put on there is going to be okay for a week or two without buying a gun.
Look, people are so hypocritical because you know that a person that is accidentally on a terrorist watch list is a tiny, tiny percentage. You know that, right? And the big liberty that they're being denied is access to a weapon temporarily.
Yeah, really fast.
Until, like, Carly Fiorina claims she knew somebody on the terrorist watch list. I don't believe her at all. Okay, but let's say that she's telling the truth.
He was killed by a bear in that time. He could have defended himself.
Right. So how long did it take your incredibly well-connected friend to get off the terrorist watch list? My guess is about 3.5 seconds. At most 3.5 months, right? For that, we should allow the 98% of people on the terrorist watch list that are actually terrorists to also be able to buy a weapon immediately. That's a mental argument. And if you're worried about terrorism, it's an argument you would never make. The reality is you're not worried about terrorism. You're not worried about anything else. The only thing you want is, give me my guns, my guns, my guns, my guns.
Yeah.
For two sets of people. The gun manufacturers who think, fantastic, I make all this money, and the conservatives in this country who are mortally afraid of everything, including their own shadow. I need a gun, I need a gun, I need a gun. Oh, I'm so scared of everything. There's dark people everywhere. I'm so scared. Give me a gun. Right? And usually you don't use it against the others. As John pointed out earlier, we can literally do a story. We can maybe do about...
Look, we do 90 people get shot every day. So.
Yeah, over 90 people get shot every day. We could probably do about a dozen stories every single day about accidental shootings where you shoot your 2-year-old in the face or your 2-year-old shoots you in the face, and it goes on and on.
Yeah. Okay, let's turn to the president. So while giving details on his proposed gun control executive actions, President Obama spoke about some of the recent mass shootings that we've had, the difficulty in getting gun control legislation passed, and he got emotional as well. So we're going to start off with his struggles to get any kind of gun control passed.
After Connecticut passed a law requiring background checks and gun safety courses, gun deaths decreased by 40%. 40%. Meanwhile, since Missouri repealed a law requiring comprehensive background checks and purchase permits, gun deaths have increased to an almost 50% higher than the national average. One study found, unsurprisingly, that criminals in Missouri now have easier access to guns. And the evidence tells us that in states that require background checks, law-abiding Americans don't find it any harder to purchase guns whatsoever. Their guns have not been confiscated. Their rights have not been infringed. With more research, we could further improve gun safety, just as with more research, we've reduced traffic fatalities enormously over the last 30 years. We do research when cars, food, medicine, even toys harm people so that we make them safer. And you know what? Research, science, those are good things. They work. But think about this. When it comes to an inherently deadly weapon, nobody argues that guns are potentially deadly. Weapons that kill tens of thousands of Americans every year, Congress actually voted to make it harder for public health experts to conduct research into gun violence. Made it harder to collect data and facts and develop strategies to reduce gun violence. So the gun lobby may be holding Congress hostage right now, but they cannot hold America hostage. We do not have to accept this carnage as the price of freedom.
I like that reference to carnage. Nice.
Yeah, so, sometimes you forget that this guy won 2 elections. And because the media makes it sound as if like, oh, Obama is unpopular. Oh, he's besieged on foreign policy, and he's done this wrong, and he's done that wrong, and you go on and on and on. And there plenty of legitimate criticism of the Obama administration. We do it on the show all the time. But you got to give the guy credit where credit is due. He's done many things right. And he was popular enough to win twice. He is the president of the United States of America. And part of that role is to take executive action and to say, hey, you know what? If Congress isn't going to do anything, these are within my powers, and I will take this action. So as he lays that out, the thing is, a great majority of the country agrees with him.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, nothing but attacks today after this speech, especially because after giving data and facts and referencing science, he also got a little emotional about the most understandable thing in the world, but apparently not good enough for Fox News.
Yeah. Well, they don't like the facts and they don't like the stats. It makes them as nervous as a minority person walking past them. I noticed one little bit there. He talked about Missouri, who repealed some of their gun control laws. And they said that made it easier for criminals to get guns there, which is odd, because I had heard that those gun control laws only affect law-abiding people and not criminals. So why is it that when you get rid of them, it suddenly becomes easier? That implies that them being there made it harder.
Let me give you one fact. This by itself, let alone every other study that's ever been done, proves the same exact thing. And it's the most self-evident thing in the world if you could actually just take your blinders off. Okay, homicide rates by gunfire in America are about 29.7 per million people. Okay, to give you context, number 2 in the developed world is Switzerland, because they also have a ton of guns. So there's a direct correlation between how many guns there are in a country and also in a state in the United States of America to how many gun killings there are, both homicide and suicide. And so 29.7 for America. Number 2 is 7.7. So we are about 4 times as much as the country that comes in number 2. That's because we have an enormous amount of guns in this country.
Yeah.
And last on that list is Australia at 1.4. So what are we?
27 times higher?
At least
25.
Call it at least 20, whatever, right? Times greater than Australia per capita. Now, why? In 1996, Australia actually did confiscate guns. There was a mass shooting. They had one. We had one literally every single day. In 2015, we had more mass shootings than there were days. In Australia, they had one, and they were like, wow, that sucks.
Yeah.
That's us getting butchered. That's like daily terrorism. We can't have that. They did a mandatory buyback gun program. You know what happened? It worked amazingly well.
Yeah.
And they haven't had any mass shootings since. They have the lowest rate among in the developed world for killings through gunfire. If you have less guns, you have less people getting killed by guns. If you can't acknowledge that, one, you refuse to believe in facts. So, okay, fine. Go live in an alternate universe where you're guided by your emotions because, you're an emotional dude and you get scared. That's the number one emotion you have. Fear, okay? And number 2, you just have to say, look, I don't care.
I don't care
about all those people being killed. Over 90 people a day get killed in America because of guns. I don't care. The 2-year-old that got shot in the face, I don't care. The family members that constantly accidentally shoot each other, I don't care. The mass shootings when you go to a movie theater and your loved ones get murdered by some madman, I don't care. You go to a church, you get massacred there. I don't care because I'm so afraid of the others and I need a gun to protect myself because I'm a coward. So facts be damned, reality be damned, I don't care.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Well, thankfully, we have the president who does care, thankfully, about the victims of gun violence. And so in this clip that you're about to see, he was talking about one of the worst gun massacres that we've had in the past couple of years in America. And he did, in fact, get a little bit emotional.
Second Amendment rights are important, but there are other rights that we care about as well. And we have to be able to balance them. Because our right to worship freely and safely, that right was denied to Christians in Charleston, South Carolina. And that was denied Jews in Kansas City. And that was denied Muslims in Chapel Hill and Sikhs in Oak Creek. They had rights too. Our right to peaceful assembly. That right was robbed from moviegoers in Aurora and Lafayette. Our unalienable right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those rights were stripped from college kids in Blacksburg and Santa Barbara and from high schoolers at Columbine. and from first graders in Newtown. First graders. And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day.
Okay, look, I've criticized fake crying from politicians before. It's usually after they get caught doing something terrible. And it's not like it doesn't happen. It's not like politicians don't fake things. They're politicians. You're going to look at that and think that was faked? Really? I mean, I think
he better become an actor after he leaves the presidency.
Yeah, I think I have a finely attuned sense to when a politician's faking it. But, I mean, he teared up there when he didn't intend to. It was obvious he paused. Those are tears pouring down his face.
He actually teared up.
I mean, I don't know. It's the most obvious thing in the world until, of course, you get to the critics.
Yeah. And also really fast, it doesn't matter. Like, if it was faking, he should be crying. And so I'm glad that he at the very least faked it if he did fake it. Because somebody in a position of power needs to make clear that this is the reaction we should have when kids get gunned down.
I hate that we're entertaining this
No, I don't
debate.
think it is. I don't think it is fake. I think it is real. But I'm saying it doesn't even matter if it was fake. People should care. But unfortunately on the right and at Fox News, they find the very idea of being emotionally affected by the murdering of first graders so bizarre, so alien, that they have to assume other people are faking it because it couldn't possibly fit into their hearts or into their brains. And so in this clip, you're going to see Andrea Tantaros of Fox News attacking Obama for caring about the victims of gun violence.
It was interesting to see the reactions among some of you when the president teared up. Why was that, Andrea?
Well, because if he really cared about an issue, especially like Chicago in his hometown, and it was plausible, he would be doing something very different than he's doing, and he would have spoken out a long time ago. I mean, this is how many years? Almost 8 years. He's almost at the end of his term. And you haven't heard him go to Chicago and really speak out about this issue, and he is uniquely poised to do so, really. But everything he's doing won't solve the problem. So I would check that podium for like a raw onion or some No More Tears. I mean, it's not really believable. I mean, and the award goes too. We are in award season.
There's no end to what degree of assholeness Fox News can achieve. So, first of all, he was mainly talking about Sandy Hook Elementary School. And when he mentioned the first graders, he teared up. He threw in Chicago at the end, saying, hey, by the way, what's happening in Chicago is also unacceptable. So what did Tantaros do? She flipped it. And she said, oh, if you want to do something about Chicago, we could have done that a long time ago. Well, first of all, he's been angry about every one of these mass shootings and talked about it. He's talked also, there's a different issue, about Chicago many, many, many times.
Yeah.
And he is doing something about it. That's why he just did these executive actions.
Yeah.
Now you're against him taking action, but you blame him for not taking action. What she's actually saying is he should have gone and yelled at black people about their culture earlier in Chicago. Yeah. And so don't shed any tears now. But that's not what he was crying about. And no, that's not the correct answer. People are getting killed all across the country with guns. And you tell me if we yell at black people in Chicago, that would solve the problem? Well, you're either an idiot and an ass or an asshole, or very likely both.
Yeah, and she apparently has the worst memory in the world because he does speak out after all of the major mass shootings. I have to say major mass shootings because it's America, and we have to make distinctions between types of mass shootings. But he does speak out, and he gets attacked on Fox News every single time. And they say, oh, you should have gone to Chicago and spoken about the violence there. Because in the past, when the president has spoken about gun violence and the issues between the police and African-American communities in America, it's been very well received by Fox News. That was the stupidest thing I think I've ever heard her say. And he would be doing something very different. Then fill in the blank. Tell us what you think he should do. And what you think he should do is encourage more people to have guns, obviously, because that's clearly working so well around the country. But it wasn't just Andrea Tantaros. In this next clip, you're going to see Meghan McCain.
I think this will, not to use a weird word, but I think this will backfire on him in a lot of different ways, because I agree, nothing gets Republican voters out, like thinking that, the Second Amendment is under attack, which it is today. I don't understand why he's doing this. I agree with Andrea. The reason why I was reacting the way I was reacting when he was crying is because it just didn't seem horribly authentic. And maybe it is. I don't know him at all, but I agree with you. There's so much more to be done. Again, if you care so much, go to your of Chicago instead of talking about God-fearing Americans who just want to protect themselves when ISIS is coming to their hometown and shooting up 14 people.
Okay, so wow, I'm stunned that they can't comprehend that a person, when talking about first graders being butchered, massacred, 20 of them in Sandy Hook, and that is, you saw the tape, we just showed it to you. That's exactly what he was talking about. They can't comprehend why somebody would get emotional about it.
It had no effect on them.
Yeah.
No effect.
I don't know, do they
I started a little bit. I didn't tear up, but I felt it a little bit.
Right.
Them, nothing. Stony. Kids dead, who cares?
Yeah. ISIS is coming. I'm scared to death. So I'm going to... So those 20 first graders were killed in Sandy Hook. I don't care about them. I'm a God-fearing, ISIS-fearing American. I fear everything. So my feelings are much more important than your kids being murdered. So, okay, you're animals like that, that's up to you. But for the rest of us, when we think about first graders being killed in their elementary schools, that's hard to stomach. And look, I got kids now, that age, and it's, John doesn't have kids, but he's a decent human being, understands first graders getting massacred is a bad thing, especially if you've got kids, though. It's visceral. It's visceral. It's hard not to tear up thinking about it. But these monsters on Fox News think like, yeah, probably faking it. Like, who'd get emotional about first graders being massacred?
It's amazing. But they get paid very well for it, obviously. Looks like we're burning through. Why don't we jump to a related story?
Okay.
Probably going to piss you off as well. So I apologize in advance for your blood pressure. The NRA is currently sounding the alarm about some proposed gun control legislation in New York. Now, this has not been passed. It's still just being debated, but they're already very worried about it. And so they wanted to alert their supporters. Now, take a look at the image that they used to do so. Sounding off on one of the most ridiculous anti-gun schemes introduced in some time. Pictures of these two female state senators with bullets scattered near their faces.
I get it. The law is about ammunition. Ha, very clever. Did they genuinely not think, hey, this looks like maybe you should kill them? That message.
Yeah. I put their pictures. Yep, I got their pictures. I got my bullets. That's a scene from the shack of a crazed hillbilly serial killer. That's what they described. That's in their... By the way, America's First Freedom is the newsletter that they sent it out in. Fuck all those other freedoms. The first one is the ability to intimidate lawmakers with some bullets near their heads.
Yeah. And it's not like a lawmaker's been shot in the head recently. Oh, right, Gabby Giffords in 2011. And did that have any effect on gun control? No, of course not. So my point is they knew they were trying to intimidate them. It's not like it got past all the editors at this magazine and they were like, oh, man, Jesus, ooh, we put the bullets right next to their heads. Yeah, I guess that could be misinterpreted. We love bullets so much, we put them in every orifice we have. But like I guess other people don't do that. Wow, ooh, sorry, we missed that. I'm waiting for an apology if they missed that. Have they issued one yet, John?
No, they haven't, actually.
Really?
No, I think it's totally fine.
So perhaps they did intend it in that way.
Just such a bizarre image. The polaroids, the fuck uses polaroids and stamps it. Mm-hmm. Like they're tracking them. They're taking pictures. The bullets. Anyway. The Brooklyn area legislators, the two women that you see there, Roxanne Persaud and Assemblywoman Joanne Simon, are both Democrats, and here is their plan. They were going to introduce legislation this month that would limit ammo purchases to twice the capacity of a gun owner's firearm during a 90-day period. Now, look, I don't personally think that that's reasonable in a lot of cases. I think that if you do target shooting, you go through 2 times the magazine capacity of a gun in 15 minutes. So I think that that's probably far too restrictive. But that doesn't mean that you need to put into the minds of maybe the 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 of your supporters who's crazier than the rest and might actually act on the subtle thing that you've planted there.
I think it's perfectly reasonable in Brooklyn. It might not be perfectly reasonable.
That's true, it is Brooklyn.
In Montana, but in Brooklyn, there's not a lot of people deer hunting, okay?
That's true.
And so this is something that makes sense in their locality. I thought conservatives were all about states' rights. So wouldn't they have the right to pass any legislation they want without being threatened with murder? I would hope so in America, but apparently gun nuts don't believe that. And we call them gun nuts because that's what they are. If you think it's funny or cool to do this image, like, first of all, don't be coy. You know it's threatening. Like, bullets next to their heads. I don't know why you would find that threatening. I mean, if a bullet pierced your head, I guess you'd die. But I don't know why you'd find that threatening. No, the law was about ammunition. Get off of it. You know it was meant to be threatening. Yeah. And if you think that that's a cool thing to do, then you're a pretty bad person. Like threatening death upon others. Wait, who does that? Oh, right, terrorists do that. That's the whole point. That's why we call it terrorism. It's to terrorize other people, intimidate them through violence or threats of violence. Okay, and here we are again with gun nuts saying, if we don't like laws in your neck of the woods, maybe we encourage people to put bullets next to your head.
Yeah. Maybe they just had so many bullets. They brushed aside as many as they could, but eventually they have to take the picture and there's just some bullets left over. So one of the women in the picture said this to the New York Daily News. The gun rights organization is clearly trying to be intimidating and it's not working, which is brave and admirable of a thing to say. But unfortunately, as Cenk pointed out, in America, we have a long history of politicians being shot at and killed in many cases. And look, I've looked over the list of names in the past 100 years. They're easily accessible on the internet. And you find immediately a very clear pattern there. It is not liberals, moderates, and conservatives being assassinated by their political enemies. It is almost overwhelmingly liberals. And we have, Gabby Giffords, obviously. And so maybe avoid the gun imagery. And just in case you forgot, a similar controversy that erupted a few years back, let's bring up image 28. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. And you're going to see an image that Sarah Palin sent out of the different races that they're targeting in 2008 with gun sights. Because that's not crazy.
Oh, look at that. Gabby Giffords was on the list. And look at that. Somebody did take that literally and put a bullet in her head.
Doesn't count. He only shot one of them, though.
Oh, okay.
They're still doing it.
Now, to be fair, Ronald Reagan was also shot. Of course, when that happened, Republicans all of a sudden became interested in gun control.
Yeah.
But then they quickly thereafter forgot about that and moved on with their lives. Thinking, mainly liberals get shot, so it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is, by the way, that's on a political level. And on a personal level, households that have guns wind up with gun deaths a great deal more. There's a direct correlation. So conservatives have more guns, liberals have plenty of guns, but percentage-wise, conservatives have more guns. So who gets killed most by gunfire? It's actually conservatives. Because if you have more guns in your house, you're far more likely to die from gunfire.
Yeah.
So, congratulations, you won? By winning this debate, that means you have a higher chance that someone in your family is going to get killed by a gun.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished? We're trying to look out for you, man. I know you don't believe it, but we don't want anybody in your family dying. We don't want Ronald Reagan getting shot. We don't want anybody getting shot. We're trying to help you, but you're certainly not seeing it that way. All right, back on the Young Turks. Cenk and Anna with you guys. Lots of tweets at hashtag TYT Live. Let's do those first, and then Anna's got some wonderful stories for us. Leanne Davis writes in, is it just me or is Ben Carson starting to sound like the leader of North Korea? Very funny, Leanne. Fairly true. And then Chuka Ijakim goes further. It says, Ben Carson catches babies, fixes brains, wins knife fights, and sleeps his way to A's. He is the most interesting man in the world.
He sounds like the leader of North Korea.
Indeed. Poor Rick says, Ben Carson's versus smog. Oh, no, sir. You don't want to burn me to a crisp. You want that town full of innocent people over there. I don't even know who smog is, and I find that funny. Okay, that's Lord of the Rings, right? Okay, yeah. Lord of the Rings got so boring after Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. I watched like the first one in that Hobbit trilogy where they never die. No one ever dies. They fight all these creatures and trolls and goblins and stuff. And no, I'm like,
Lord of the Rings was always boring. Like,
ooh,
just keeping
Gauntlet
it real.
Thrown
I
down.
tried really hard. I watched it in high school, so things have changed since then. Maybe I'd enjoy it more now.
You watched Lord of the Rings in high school?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so fucking old. Oh God. Okay, I had a revelation that I want to talk about in the post game, by the way.
Okay.
TYTnetwork.com/join. Although, to be fair, once you hear the revelation, you will say, of course. JR has a great tweet, but you really need to see it. So it's about people running to the border in America. This one should get a lot of retweets, JR. It's at JR Jackson, Jayar. So check that out. All right, guys, we got a lot of show for you, so let's get started.
All right. The country continues to grapple with a heroin addiction epidemic. And recently, The Atlantic delved deeper into the reason why this is happening. Now, there's a little-known study that was recently published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, and it talks about the number of people who get prescribed prescription painkillers and overdose on them, and then proceed to get prescribed painkillers again by the same doctors. Now, if you know anything about the heroin epidemic, it is tied to prescription painkillers. Usually people get hooked on the painkillers, and then when they can't access it, they go to heroin and they access that on the black market. However, if you look at the legal prescriptions of these painkillers, the numbers are insane. So since 2000, deaths from opioid, that's painkillers, overdoses in the United States have gone up by 200%, which is huge. Sales of prescription opioids have gone up by 300% since 1999. Now, the study that I was talking about looked at 3,000 patients who overdosed on prescription opioids but didn't die. Researchers at Boston Medical Center and Harvard University followed each one for 2 years or until they overdosed again, left their insurance, or turned 65. During this period, 91% of the patients got opioid painkiller prescriptions at least one more time after their overdoses, and 7% of them overdosed again.
See, that most of them didn't overdose.
No, it's kind of incredible that only 7% of them overdosed again, but it should be 0% overdosing again because they shouldn't be prescribed painkillers if they've overdosed. Now, the researchers are saying that this isn't necessarily malpractice by the doctors. It could be that the doctors didn't even know that these patients had overdosed in the first place.
So let's keep it real here. I know sometimes doctors get mad at me when I say this, but through several different mechanisms, these pharmaceutical companies are providing incentives for doctors to prescribe these things. Some of it is just as simple as making it easier. So they bring in usually super hot women to tell you how great these are, and a lot of the male doctors are like, oh, wow, I am really persuaded how this could really help my patients. If
do they really do that with hot women?
Yeah. Whenever I'm at a doctor's office and I see a super hot woman, she's usually carrying a little bag that she totes with her. It's from the pharmaceutical companies, and they're there to tell them how great the drugs are. A lot of the doctors get flown to conventions for free. Sometimes there's direct financial remuneration, but that's rare, okay? But through all these different incentives that they have set up, they've given the doctors permission and encouragement. Yeah, go ahead, prescribe more. I mean, they're in pain. They're in pain. We're here to help them with their pain. And look, honestly, some of it is laziness, too, on the part of the doctors, right? Okay, what's the pill for that? You got a problem, I got a pill, right? We make this nice and easy, and we move on with our lives. Now, don't get mad at me if you're a doctor. There's a lot of wonderful doctors out there that take their jobs very seriously and do a fantastic job, and you guys heal us. We appreciate it, right? But this is obviously something that is happening on a mass scale. So turning a blind eye to it ain't going to help. Clearly, it's being overprescribed, and it's leading to a lot of addiction.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the feds realized that prescription painkillers were being overprescribed, so they decided to start regulating it a little more. And as soon as they did that, again, more and more people couldn't get access to the prescription painkillers, and so they went to the black market and started using heroin. The reason why that happens is because these painkillers are much more addictive than some doctors let their patients know about. So they take it as if it's harmless. Hey, it's a prescription, it's legal, I'm not doing anything wrong, and then boom, they're addicted to it.
Yeah, one of the best predictions in TYT history was when Ben Mankiewicz heard that Rush Limbaugh had a hearing problem, and he's like, that's not a normal health problem people have. He did something wrong.
Yeah.
And people at the time were like, you can't say that. The guy's got a health problem. What's wrong with you? And then later we found out that's because he was taking these opioids like by the barrels full. And like in this story, he'd get one doctor after another, and he'd get his nanny or whoever, his house cleaner, not a nanny because that doesn't have kids, but his house cleaner to get prescriptions from all sorts of different doctors. And he was abusing it so much that it wound up, costing him his hearing, among other problems. But obviously that was a long time ago with Rush doing that. But it's part of the ideology here, which is that, it's prescription drugs. That's not a bad drug like crack or heroin. And I see, those illegal drugs are for lowlives. Whereas a doctor prescribes this, it must be great.
I know, and the thing about it that makes me so angry is that, of course, people have died because of overdoses related to painkillers. There's another painkiller out there that no one's ever overdosed on, but it's considered a Schedule I substance, and that's marijuana. I mean, it enrages me so much. Like, the war on drugs, it's all about profit. It's all about ensuring that people continue to make money off the war on drugs. And as a result, people are suffering. They're suffering on a criminal level, and they're also suffering on a health level.
Think about it. Pharmaceutical industry is the number one example of crony capitalism and capturing the government. So if you're a conservative, you should hate what happened here with this crony capitalism. So they don't like competition, so they decided to buy enough politicians so they wouldn't have any competition. So first off, for a lot of their drugs, they literally have a monopoly. It used to be 5 years, and then you could make an argument for that. Well, they spent a lot of money, invested a lot of money into coming up with these cures and these pills, and hence they should. Now they've extended that to 12 years for a lot of these drugs, which is totally unjustifiable. That's just like, hey, we already bought the politicians. We might as well make many more billions of dollars with no competition at all. Then they put into the Medicare bill, into the several different bills that were passed on healthcare, including Obamacare, both first with Bush, then with Obama, that the government cannot negotiate prices with them. Why not? The government is one of the biggest buyers of these medicines, and of course they should be able to negotiate prices like you would in a free market. But they want to kill the free market. I tell you all this because when you look at it in context, what is the other way to have a monopoly and kill off your competition? Well, we'll make certain drugs illegal. That way, by law, you cannot take them. And then our drugs will be your only choice. And we'll charge you a lot of money, and you can get just as addicted on our drugs. In fact, you can get a hell of a lot more addicted on our drugs than you could with some of the illegal ones like marijuana. And so you're forced to buy our stuff, and we're your legal drug dealers. And the government says we're official and we're awesome, and you should continue to, if you're a good American, buy from us. So you can't have a bigger case of crony capitalism and buying off the government than what the pharmaceutical companies have done. And that's why they're the number one lobby in America, even more so than defense contractors, oil companies, and the big banks. And if you want to smoke a joint and somebody's going to put you in jail over it, they're part of the reason why.
Exactly. All right, let's talk about some more criminal activity. More than 200,000 people have signed various petitions trying to get some justice for Stephen Avery, who was the subject of a very popular Netflix documentary called Making a Murderer. Now, Stephen Avery was convicted for a rape that he did not commit, and he served 18 years in prison as a result of that. And then when he got out and attempted to sue the local police department that got him prosecuted in the first place, well, it seems as though they framed him for a murder that he didn't commit, and as a result, he's serving the rest of his life behind bars. Now, if you watch the documentary, you'll see all of the evidence that was presented in his favor, but the jury didn't really take that into account. Now, people are trying to get some justice for him by signing these petitions, but the petitions don't really matter because he wasn't filed on federal charges, so the president can't pardon him. However, as of early Monday, the series has compelled nearly 200,000 people to sign Change.org and White House petitions calling for his pardon, an impossibility under the Constitution, which allows presidential pardons only for federal criminal convictions. Now, there was one person who commented on these petitions, and I think that he hit the nail on the head. He says, after watching Making a Murderer, I'm outraged with the injustices which I have been allowed to compound and left unchecked, which have been allowed to compound and left unchecked in the case of Stephen Avery. Avery's unconstitutional mistreatment at the hands of corrupt local law enforcement is completely unacceptable and is an abomination of due process. There are other comments as well. And look, it's kind of hard to go over all the evidence that was presented in that documentary. It's a docu-series, so it's 10 episodes. Each one is longer than an hour. But you watch it and you see the insane injustice that Stephen Avery and his family had to endure. And I like that this is riling people up and it's making people realize how unjust our so-called justice system is. But this is not an isolated incident. This is stuff that happens all the time. The Innocence Project continuously exonerates people who have been convicted for crimes that they haven't committed, including those who are serving, deaths, like they were sentenced to the death penalty. So I don't know if people are realizing how ridiculous the death penalty is, considering all the flaws in our system, but this should be one example of that.
Even me, I look at this and I think, and I didn't watch the series. I'm looking forward to watching it and being outraged later. But as I look at it, I instinctively go, yeah, but what about the prosecution side? Were they fair enough to the prosecution? Are we sure about this? Because it's a documentary from one point of view. Now, of course, they say they tried desperately to talk to the prosecution. They're perfectly aware of the prosecution's side and took that into account. But I don't know why I'm trying to be so fair to the prosecution here.
You have to watch it.
When in reality, are there an enormous number of cases in the country that you could make movie after movie, documentary after documentary about? Of course, as Anna pointed out, and this is the reason I switched my view on the death penalty. Well, after the Innocence Project took all those guys off of death row, it's like, well, obviously we're killing the wrong guys.
Yep.
So I might be a barbarian enough to want to kill the right guys, but not barbarian enough to want to kill the wrong guys. So, I don't think we should be that surprised that, yes, that there's a case of injustice like this. And I'm kind of glad it's doing so well. Now this is the second or third show, podcast and documentary that have done so well in this regard, because maybe we'll pay more attention to the grave injustices that do happen in this country over and over again.
The documentary series highlights so many different issues with our justice system, right? Not only, the corruption with police officials and prosecutors and judges, but also the fact that there is a two-tier justice system. Stephen Avery was able to hire two incredible lawyers, right? And usually that will get you what you need in order to, not get convicted of a crime you didn't commit. But the corruption was so deep that even the best lawyers were unable to get him the justice that he deserved. Now, he got about $400,000 from a settlement for the wrongful conviction, right? He had to spend all of that on the two really good attorneys. And he still couldn't get what he needed. I mean, what chance does anyone have if you don't have that kind of money to hire the best representation?
Well, in his first case where he was wrongfully convicted, he didn't have that kind of money. He was from poor background, so they railroaded him fairly easily. He only had the money after he got the settlement for the first wrongful conviction to fight what now people perceive to be the second wrongful conviction.
And he had to settle for $400,000. Think about it. He spent 18 years of his life behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. He had to settle for $400,000 because at that point, they had already charged him with the murder thing. So he was like, I don't know what to do. I guess I have to settle for whatever they'll give me, and I can use that for my defense. But unfortunately, it didn't work.
And that might be one of the reasons why they charged him with the second murder.
I think it's a huge reason why.
Yeah. Man, I'm so happy that more Americans now get to see it because it's out there, man. Turning a blind eye to it isn't going to make it any better. Better to shine a spotlight on it so we can begin to fix it.
Exactly.